Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Dr. Saralyn Mark. Dr. Mark is an expert in space medicine, women's health, endocrinology, and geriatrics. As president and CEO of SolaMed Solutions and its space subsidiary, she advises organizations and agencies, including NASA and the White House, on health and space-related policies and programs. Dr. Mark is also president of iGIANT, the only nonprofit accelerating gendered innovation precision design in the world. She holds 4 academic appointments, including at Yale's and King's College London in the Center for Human and Aerospace Physiology. Dr. Mark authored Stellar Medicine, A Journey Through the Universe of Women's Health, and is a regular contributor to media outlets and hosts the podcast Always Searching. Dr. Mark, welcome to the Future Space.
Daniel, thank you. I'm delighted to be with you today.
Dr. Mark, what would be 3 words that for you capture the essence of space?
I would use the acronym PI. I think that's appropriate when we think about space. And so for P, that stands for PRIMAL, and I'll explain why. I would be innovation, and the other I would be imagination.
Primal.
Well, if you think about it, we're all made of stardust, celestial dust from the beginning of time. It's embedded into our DNA. I think it's just natural for us to want to get back out into space. It's sort of like coming home. So it's that primal feeling, going to an environment from which we came. And even though we see it as foreign and hostile, yet it is our home. We're made of stardust.
While we come from there, it's also very hostile. So one of the questions I often ask to my guests is, do you think that we have a place in space? We do have a place on Earth. It's our home, our bodies of organisms that have been created out of this environment. But out in space, are we meant to be there?
Well, I think we look at it from, at least from my end of it, the medical aspect. The body adapts. It adapts to the microgravity environment of space. So that's a natural process. So in a sense, it takes time. We evolve, just like we had to evolve coming out of the water onto the surface. We begin to evolve and we begin to adapt. The challenge is when we then want to go to a body, another celestial body that has gravity. So let's say we want to land on the moon again, 16G. We go to Mars, 3A, certainly coming back to Earth, 1G. And you can see it from our astronauts that when they come back from a space trip, and it's been a while, that they can be a little wobbly, they can feel a little uncomfortable coming back to this planet. So then you have to ask the question, where do you really belong? So I think for us as human beings, yes, we do belong in space, but we have to accept that we're going to have to adapt to that microgravity environment. And for me, I look at it through a sex-gender lens. I always tell people I see my universe through the prism of space using a sex-gender lens. Because the body adapts so quickly and so dramatically, you can discern very small changes between men and women, for example. But yet those small differences can have profound impact. And what we can do is utilize that knowledge so that everybody can live and do well in space.
So is the goal is to embrace our differences or to become the same?
I love that question. I did a roundtable for my nonprofit. By the way, iGIANT, again, another acronym. And if you've lived in Washington, D.C. long enough, you know
everything is an acronym.
We have acronyms for everything. I was with NASA for about 18 years. And I remember my first few months, just writing down every acronym, trying to understand what people were talking about. So it becomes somewhat second nature. But iGIANT's an acronym. And it stands for Impact of Gender Sex on Innovation, Novel Technologies. And we're the only nonprofit accelerator for gendered innovation across health, IT, transportation, retail sectors in the world. And I think what we have learned is that being the same is not necessarily better. In fact, being different is wonderful because we are now adapting individually to the environments we're in. And we have the tools, we have the resources, and we have the technologies to allow people to, again, live well, work well, and safely in any environment. So we need to honor those differences. I know in our society today, we fight them. We try to separate ourselves by these differences. And yet it's those differences that allow us to evolve, that allow us to adapt to whatever environment we're in.
When people talk about diversity, coming from someone who's done a lot of wilderness expeditions, who's written about nature, who's look at nature as guideline for some of the dynamics that happen in the world. Diversity is just a very strong strategy for survival. That's basically independently taking the moral out of it. It's not, you don't want to do it because it's the right thing. You want to do it because it makes everything better. It makes you more resilient. It makes life more exciting. So the diversity takes a total different perspective when you approach it from that angle rather than to say, no, we need to be, diverse for X, Y, and Z that are extremely kind of moral and righteous approach to it rather than just go at it. It's like, no, it's just kind of a survival strategy that makes sense.
You're absolutely right. Spot on. Think about it. We're related to chimpanzees. I think we share something like 99.9% of our genome with chimpanzees, but it's that small percentage that sets us apart and allowed us to evolve, to be able to develop the technology that we're using right now to speak to each other, to travel around the moon, medications to keep us healthy. I think in some ways we become afraid of diversity if we're not around people that look and act exactly like us because we don't know how to adapt. I was once asked by the Trump administration when I testified in front of the National Space Council about this question. And I said, homogeny makes it easier in the beginning, but it's actually that diversity that provides more efficient teams, better working teams. We have diverse skill sets. We see the world slightly differently, and we're able to perform better and create more cohesion. So it takes a little bit of effort in the beginning, but once you get there, everybody benefits.
It's an environment that demands more energy to manage. There's a reason why religious environment create a very black and white. As the society increases in complexity, religion would be less and less, but the reality is actually no. There's a reaction in where people now find a refuge in that simplicity of organizing the world around us because it's complicated, right? If you have to start questioning everything, back in the days, women were in one place, men were in the other place. You like it, you don't like it, that's up to you, but those are the position. Now, if you open the spectrum and you start to just be for whatever interpretation, it becomes extremely complicated. It is a more demanding start, but then once you start with it, then you start to develop the skill to manage it, and then the richness comes with it.
Exactly. I think for me, there's the beauty and the complexity. We want to live in a binary world, good, bad, right, wrong, darkness, light, but it's not that way. It's a gradient. What I'm hoping is that, for example, with the students that we have in our nonprofit, that we're beginning to teach that critical thinking so they can see the world along a spectrum. Certainly at NASA, we're watching right now the Artemis mission, right? And it's a test flight mission. So they're expecting to have a lot of challenges in front of them. They're expecting a lot to encounter, and they're going to learn from it. They're not afraid of it. But what did they do before they went into it? They accepted that principle. They began to work together to adapt to challenges every minute. They trained to do that. And now they're in that environment and they know they can work together as a team. And I think we can take a lot of those lessons from this program and put it to our everyday lives and embrace it and not be afraid of it. Because if we don't, we're going to see the extermination of our species.
When you say the black and white, and it doesn't have to be like this, the reality of the black and white, of the binary mode, is our biology actually started from that. It's a certain luxury where we can start to question the binary system around us. But from a very animal perspective, a primal place, it's either fight or flight, either I live or I die. And the biology is often, most of the time, conflicting with our psyche. We are the first species ever in the history of the Earth, not just the human history, but ever on Earth, that has now to worry about the output, the input, what it does, how much it does, because there's no other species that worries about that. The whales just swim, they poop whatever they need to poop, and then they move.
Well, it's interesting you said that as I'm listening about the waste management systems on board Orion having some challenges. So that could be a very important point. But I think what's going to make it a really interesting time is as we move into the world of AI. These computers are learning. And some are saying, well, are they becoming spirited? Do they have souls, so to speak? And that's a whole other question, but they're learning. In a sense, is it going to be competition? Are they taking our jobs? Are we going to be subservient to something that we've created because it was able to learn beyond what our capacity is able to handle? I think those are really important philosophical questions.
What are your answers?
Well, if I had that, I would then win the Nobel Prize, probably. And I think, we can ponder it. It's a question of adapting to the world that we're using, but having limits. I think we really do need to question, how do we utilize this technology? Not be afraid of it. To really have an astute conversation with people from the world of ethics and scientists and religion, all the different aspects that make our lives very rich, to see, how do we handle it? How do we control it? I also don't want it in the hands of very few people, because I think it can be used for some nefarious purposes. I know we're all, concerned about our data and our information, and do we have protection, and how are we moving forward? I've recently been appointed a commissioner, an e-health commissioner for the state then. And these are really powerful questions, because we need to use the technology to provide services, to provide care. But at what point do you then begin to limit it so the data and the knowledge that's generated is not used for other purposes from which you're developing it? So these are big questions.
Being afraid is probably the worst strategy. Then you don't address the skills that need to be developed to address it. There's so many mistakes in the past that have been created because we were afraid of it. I mean, even complicated as nuclear energy.
Well, I was just about to say that. Look at what we do every day, right? Wars that get generated, things that we do because we're afraid.
Afraid of these new technologies, but also afraid of who we are, and kind of denying the complexity of the fundamental dynamics of who we are. Like about judging, like we're always so quick to judge, or saying we should never judge, or shaming when others judge. But the reality is that the brain works like that. The brain is always making shortcuts.
Well, that's the primal aspect. It's wired into.
But if you can accept and understand it, then you can develop the skills so you can rise above it. If you want to avoid it, then you're constantly living in this place of denial. And every time that you're faced with the reality, then everybody just kind of freaks out. But the reason why I can walk into a room and I can say, this is a chair and then this is a table, even if I've never been there, is because my brain is recognizing, making all these shortcuts. The problem is that it doesn't make the difference between the chair and the person. But if I can recognize that, then I can develop the skills to rise above and to say, okay, those are judgments, but I can go beyond that.
And it's another interesting question, because it's, what is that gut feeling? And Gavin de Becker wrote a brilliant book many years ago about the gift of fear, and that it's wired into us to survive, and that we often try to downplay it. But you're also bringing up another point. When does fear then generate action that could be deleterious to us? So it's becoming self-aware. It's becoming self-aware. And maybe through working with AI on an individual basis, you can begin to understand who you are as human. And that's a sort of profound thought, but that's possible, perhaps.
North America was an answer to Europe, a broken Europe. And you can say that North America was created with a vision. If you go to Washington at the National Library, even though there was a lot of mistakes, obviously, that was done in that creation of that vision, it was still this blank canvas where a lot of people created what the world could be. Do you think that space is going to be that next blank canvas for society?
I am a product of the Apollo years, so I have just dated myself. But I'm just so glad that I grew up during the time I did, because I got to see the genesis of us moving into space. And so it became second nature as a child. I grew up with the Jetsons, if you remember that. That's the cartoons that focused on space. And it became part of our everyday life. You're familiar with William Shatner quite well, Star Trek, and then you moved to Star Wars. And just space is just something that, from my generation at least, it just became an existence that we just felt was a natural evolution. I think for future generations, or the Artemis generation, they've kind of grown up with it more from a virtual reality side. So I am so excited that they got to actually feel and experience the launch yesterday. And I hope that instills the drive to move forward. Again, I come back to that P, the primal. Yes, of course. Whether we set up lunar bases, we talked about setting up lunar bases about 15 years ago. And, things kind of got sidewind a little bit differently. But again, it's the question of we are always bound to move. You mentioned going from Europe to North America, exploring the high seas. Well, we now explore a different high seas, literally high seas. So my answer to that is yes. And I think the other important part, we've both been down to Antarctica. One of the things that I think is so beautiful about that continent is it belongs to everybody. And it's a peaceful continent. And you don't touch the animals. You let them be pristine and where they are. You observe. You don't pluck any vegetation that might be growing out of the ice. There's something so perfect down there because we are there to watch and not destroy. And I think if we can carry that kind of philosophy as we explore the heavens, if we go into space, that will be a wonderful gift for humanity. One of my concerns is that we're making the moon out to be another space race. We did that in the 60s, early 70s with Russia. And then, of course, they're one of our best partners right now for the International Space Station. Is that are we going to do that with China? And again, competition's good. It keeps us on our toes. But I don't want us to be at the point where it becomes competitive to a point of evil. Because we all own the moon. We all see the moon. The moon influences so many aspects of our lives here on Earth. It doesn't belong to one person or to one country or to one continent.
When you talk about Antarctica, that capacity to experience that place in that nature is a very privileged opportunity in where we don't depend on nature anymore. Basically, technology has brought this opportunity where nature can be experienced just for its beauty and not for its package. If you read all the stories of farming or traveling or even explorers, their survival basically only existed at the mercy of what they could find along the way. Now, you get on the ship, you have all the provisions that you have, you get down to Antarctica, you take out your camera. Nature is not something that you can enjoy. It's not something that you have to fight. As we get to space, the reality, the beginning is going to be very challenging. Moon is going to be challenging, obviously, because now you have, for the first time since you and I have been born, we have this new territory that is, how is it going to be managed? How are these resources are going to be managed? We have countries that have very different perspective of how it should be done. And one of the things that I've written about Antarctica is that if you don't, or in the moon, if you don't go there, then other people will go and they might not do it the way that you want to do it. So what are your thoughts about managing the complexity and understanding those limitations and the reality? And again, realizing the fundamentals of it so that you can develop the skills to address those issues.
So when I went down to Antarctica, I had the opportunity to go to different stations. I believe I was at 3 or 4 of them. Of course, the British station, the Russian station, the Argentinian station. And they all were independent, but yet they knew they could count on each other. I see the Antarctic Treaty as a really good stepping stone. I know we've talked about lunar treaties, and those are certainly going to have to be implemented by an agnostic body. You have to start somewhere, and of course, everyone wants to plant their flag and say, this is mine, and it belongs to me, and these are my minerals. But in order to survive in that kind of hostile environment, and maybe perhaps it's good it is hostile, because you're going to have to work together. And I remember in the 70s, there used to be movies about stranded in space. I forget the names of it, but people were stranded in space and other nations had to come and help them out and save them. And you saw that collaboration. So I want us to take that forward. The International Space Station has been a phenomenal example of how we can work with many different nations, speaking many different languages, having many different cultures and dietary patterns and processes. And we've been able to do it by creating these international bodies to help us manage it. So somebody has to get there first. You open the door for all of humanity, and then we can come and follow. And it's up to all of us who've worked in the space community to ensure that it's done the right way.
It's definitely going to be interesting. There is the belief that space is going to be very soft, and then you have different who understand it's going to be quite rough with these new dynamics that we haven't seen for quite some time, and where there's opportunities. I mean, and we're not talking science fiction anymore. We have, with Vera Rubin, discovering these many asteroids that are coming close to the Earth, close enough that we can go and start capturing them. We don't have to go to them. We can actually just capture them as they pass, they swing by. And then we can aggregate and park them into this orbit. And it's going to be much easier to go to them than to go to the moon. So who starts to own and regulate those places?
I mean, space law is a very popular discipline, and it will increasingly be. What I'm actually really excited about are these commercial space stations. I think they're an important step towards democratizing space exploration for all of us. My company, SolaMed Solutions, its mission is to improve human health and performance on Earth and space, utilizing cutting-edge technologies and multidisciplinary leadership teams through the commercial space sector. So what we know is that we will have a grand opportunity to ensure everybody has an opportunity. Again, the financial challenges will certainly be there, but at least from the health and the medical and the scientific, we can address that. And I think that's really exciting. So those are important stepping stones. We want to talk about long duration class missions, but let's also first start with these missions for the commercial space station, because I think that will open our minds to how we can work together, how we can collaborate, and how we can live and enjoy space.
In terms of biology in space and evolution, obviously technology is going to play a huge role. It's not just natural evolution that's going to work. It's going to happen, but we're going to be at the forefront with technology, trying to figure out how we can enhance and we can counteract some of the effects. If you could snap your fingers and have the first technology that could solve your biggest issue, would it be radiation? Would it be procreation? What would be your first wish to solve as we go to space?
That's a really good way to look at it. What to solve? So we assume that it can be solvable. I think radiation is a major concern. I mean, we have a greater understanding of all the different types of radiation that bombard our bodies, different ways to try to protect ourselves. But if we're really going to do exploration class missions, let's say to Mars, the impact of radiation is going to be significant. So some of those space explorers who want to go say, well, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me whether I'm irradiated and I develop cancer because I'm just not coming back to Earth, that voyage is going to be extraordinary and I'll take it. And that may happen. That certainly may happen. I mean, think about crossing the Atlantic in the early days, coming over to this continent. We didn't know anything, thought we were falling off the planet. So I think radiation is going to be it is a big issue, and it will continue to be. I think once we get an even greater handle on it, we're going to learn a lot for terrestrial application, because we certainly use radiation for medical purposes, whether for diagnosis or screening or treatment. And so we need to understand that better. And then as we go into high-risk areas, we may be exposed to radiation. And then if the world does stupid stuff, we may be really worried about radiation. So it behooves us to understand that issue in greater numbers.
What about low orbits, bioprinting, biomanufacturing? How much of that is going to come into a normal future?
I think 3D printing, bioprinting, we're certainly utilizing it. And I have great hope for it, and certainly for organ development here, even on this planet. And I think it's going to play a major role, because you can't take everything with you. So, it may not be as advanced as building you that colony, that settlement on whatever surface you're on. But I think it's certainly going to be an asset and a tool. And it needs to be here too. We've got a lot of remote areas on this beautiful planet that we need to take care of the needs of our people. And I think 3D printing is going to and will continue to play a role.
The biology and then the gender reality of space, the fact that it's a very dynamic ecosystem, and now you are creating these environments where it's limited in space. Everything has to be recycled. The tests of the psyche are being pushed to the limit. what do you think we're going to discover about ourselves and about what we can do or can achieve?
Well, it's interesting. We use a lot of analog environments on this planet. So, for example, Antarctica has been a wonderful test bed, and we've seen how people interact with each other, especially in hostile conditions, isolated conditions, how one communicates. The issue of sex and gender, and again, I'm going to define sex. I use the National Academy of Science definitions. So sex is more the biological construct, gender is more the psychosocial. We talk about a gradient, so we know epigenetics play a role. As we interact with our environment, the environment shapes our own genome, so it's more of a gradient. But what we can begin to do is move us towards personalized medicine. And that is really exciting. We have precision medicine from a population basis, but moving us towards precision medicine. So in a sense, imagine if you were to take some of your cells, put them on a chip, send them up into space, into microgravity, see how they adapt, study them, bring them back, potentially what you're at risk for. And then we can begin developing the preventive measures here on this planet, countermeasures for when you go into space, and know a better way to take care of you for when you return from a recovery perspective. And it's just such a brilliant idea to be able to begin tailoring a care. And then think about it, if we were able to do that here on Earth, if we put people who have cancer and we begin to test their cells to see how they respond to certain chemotherapy or radiation protocols, and we kind of are doing that. We can better adapt treatments to get the benefit rather than the side effect.
Personalized medicine is definitely something a lot of people are looking for. AI is going to be a big part of it, and the technology and where we can get these treatments that are very more specific to what you're experiencing rather than being generalized. We all know how complicated biology is. Someone can be smoking a pack of cigarettes every day and will be fine. And then you get someone who never smokes and get lung cancer. And
it's in their genes, something locked it off, right?
It's in their genes. And, sometimes you can have the foundation for something very malign and it's never going to get activated. And you go through trauma and then it triggers the immune system and then the stress. And now you have cancer. But stress is one of the biggest triggers of all the ailments that we have.
Let's talk about that for a minute. I always hear that all the time. And certainly, stress, as an endocrinologist, it impacts your hormonal milieu. We know that. It impacts our ability to fight other infections. But we can't live in a world without stress. It's just impossible. In fact, I think it'd be stressful to not have any stress. But the question is, how do you manage it? How do you handle it? How do you take care of it? And that's the ticket. My father was a Holocaust survivor. He was a child survivor of 4 concentration camps, lost his entire family, lost about 100 relatives, and just a beautiful, beautiful human being. And I always wondered, how did you retain, 1, your humanity, but 2, how did you manage that stress? How did you handle it? And not, first of all, develop all these psychiatric conditions and medical conditions and everything else. And, he just said, 1, he believed in something bigger than himself. He believed in God. He believed that he was there to be the messenger to teach the world about tolerance and love and humanity's need for each other. And he certainly did that, a lot of work with Steven Spielberg. And then the second part of it was that he took joy in little things. And it used to drive me crazy because I would call him and I'd be very upset in medical school about something or training. I was exhausted, been working 110 hours a week. And he would always start the conversation with, "So tell me something good." And I remember thinking, "Pops, why are you asking me that? I'm here to complain." But he changed the way my mind began to think. And then at the end of it, he, of course, always ended his conversations with me with, "I love you. And what are you going to do good for yourself today?" And again, shifting the way we saw the world. And I miss him tremendously because I think he'd just be a beacon of light in these crazy times right now. But that's something that I think we can teach. If it's not even intuitive for some people, I think we can learn that.
Something very similar in a lot of writings that I've done is stress or tension. When we meditate and you tell people absence of tension, and the reality is that tension is necessary. It's always there, but it's more of a balance within those tensions. It's like sailing. Like, you don't want to be on a sailboat with no wind. Like, you're not going anywhere. You want the wind, but you want to control the wind. You don't want to be at the mercy of it. You want to ride with it. Like the same thing like surfing. Everything is tension. I'm sitting on the chair because there's a tension that's preventing me from just falling. My body is together by tension. My lungs, I'm breathing because of tension in and out. My heart. When we look at if the heart is alive or not, the absence of tension, the flat line is death. So tension is necessary, but it's how do you manage it, or finding that balance and where you have enough tension so that, like a tree, no tension, you can't get up, like you go all over the place. You want to have enough, but not too much.
It's interesting. Speaking of tension, so we all have stressful days and we work sometimes with stressful people. And if we can reframe it of, okay, great, this person's my teacher. They're teaching me something of what I need to do. That kind of shifts it from, I just want to kill that person because they're driving me crazy, to versus, what a wonderful teacher. Now, that takes a lot to do. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of work, but imagine if we can do that. And I think as we explore and we go into space, we're going to have to do that, because you can't vote somebody off the ship. You can't throw them off. That's not a successful mission. So it's learning how to adapt to turn it into something positive, I think, is the big ticket item there.
Often in movies, when they project species that have the capacity to travel in the universe, you always have this alien who's very primal and just kills everything. My personal opinion is, as a species, you've developed the capacity to go beyond your planet. By default, you have a certain understanding or a certain humanity that is necessary to make that leap as a species. Not that there won't be any conflict, but there's a certain understanding of that diplomacy or these relationship that when you do find other species, it's not necessarily going to be about conquering or destroying, but more about trying to figure out the win-win situation for everyone, because the skills necessary for that leap comes with having a more peaceful approach to resolution to problems, rather than going at it and go and say, I'm going to.
Right. Well, it's, we have these popular movies, The War of the Worlds, the Martians have landed. But if you think about, like what you just said, if they've got such evolved technology, they could certainly take us over in a drop of a hat, and they probably would have done it by now if they're here. So maybe they're our teachers, and we embrace them and not be afraid. I've often said that if we begin to identify species from other planets, it will unite us as humanity, because we're no longer going to be Canadians or American or whatever nation you're from, but we're going to be Earthlings and human beings. And so, taking it and turning it into something positive, I think is important. We're at a really interesting time, between disclosure and trying to understand what has happened in our past, what's happening now, where are we going? And I think it's actually exciting, but this is where we need to have that benevolence and that compassion, and not to do harm to others.
You've lived in London, you've lived in Washington, D.C., New York, San Francisco. Now you're in Colorado, and you were sharing with me how your reality is very different and creating this understanding. Isn't it also part of the challenge to recognize those differences? Yes, we're all Earthlings, but I know that when there is the narrative of looking back and looking at Earth, it's like, okay, we're all coming from one planet, therefore we should all get along. But living in the same house as a family does not mean that every single family member gets along very well. We're borderline arguing and killing each other, and from the same family. So isn't it the challenge is actually to recognize those differences so that we can address how to rise above them? The geographical reality, the cultural, the upbringing reality of someone that is in the mountains of Kazakhstan it's night and day compared to someone in Europe or someone in the US, or even within the US, you can have that differences.
Again, it's being culturally aware. And for example, a lot of our astronaut training is helping people to understand how to work with each other, to accept those differences. We certainly have had to learn to do it in Antarctica, and we do it in any kind of a closed environment. And it's not to say it's all going to be, panacea and kumbaya time. but it can be, where are you learning from it, and does it have to be destructive? There are going to be points where there are just some people that you can't work with, whether they're psychologically impaired or they're addicted to other drugs or substances or whatever it might be, or some are born sociopathic. But overall, if you can find that basic common good, I think you can manage it, make it. It's just, I think the challenge for some of us is that, when I say us, I mean human beings, is that we're very egocentric. We were talking about this, but we haven't really had to suffer. We've never really known what it's like not to turn on a faucet and have water, or to not be able to put gas in our car to get from point A to B, or have food on our shelves. We might have some discomforts if we've lost power during a storm or something catastrophic environmentally has happened, but we haven't had to really know fear of whether you go to bed at night and a bomb's going to drop on your house. So I think it's walking in somebody else's shoes that often does it for people. And I think that's why with my father, because he lived through such horror, that everything to him was joy. He found joy in a sunrise, a sunset. So perhaps what we need to do is stop focusing on all that we're accruing and all identifying those who are the best because they've got the biggest house or the biggest bank account, but really by who has the biggest heart, who has the greatest understanding, who can communicate in a way where we find common good. I mean, these wars that we're fighting right now, not only is it going to impact right now, but the generational trauma is going to be significant. And that's where we need to stop and think about these things.
Perception of tragedy is a little bit blown out of proportion. During COVID, when people were saying this is the worst that our society have gone through, I'm like, this is such an insult to the past.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I know. It's like, I can't go inside the restaurant. Yeah.
You're still getting stuff delivered, and then you have your entertainment.
Exactly.
And
communicate this way, and you found a way to navigate. It's absolutely fascinating. But it changed somebody's everyday pattern, and people don't like that. And I tell people, I worked at HHS as well as NASA, as well as the White House when I was in government, in that we had public health preparedness. So I've been telling people now, just prepare. Whether you need to use it for a blizzard or a hurricane or whatever might have, the grid goes somewhere, you have that. And it's just the question of preparation, but it's the basic stuff that you need. Do you have water? Do you have some basic food? Shelter? And this then takes it, again, what we started the conversation with talking about primal, it takes it back to its basic primal level. And then that's what you need to survive.
And everybody's trying to do the right thing according to the knowledge and technology and options that are available to them. We're all trying to put food on the table. We're all trying to pay the bills, and we're all trying to give our kids a future, and then life happens. So understanding the complexity of application of all these realities gives ourselves the empathy needed to address all these different issues. Because I don't think that people wake up in the morning wanting to be bad or wanting to do the wrong thing. They wake up wanting to do the best they can with the options that they have.
So, Daniel, I want to ask you, if that's the case, then why is there so much conflict and fighting and war and violence?
Because either people feel threatened by something else. They don't feel recognized. They don't feel valued. They feel that they don't have an option, an opportunity. I was listening to this podcast. They were talking, this journalist who's focused their entire life about black market or gray market or people doing things illegal. And her opinion is basically 90% of the people that she interviews, they don't do that because they want to be criminals. They are doing that because those were the options. That was the environment that I grew up in. Those were, what was presented to me. When people hurt others, the place that I usually go is, you must have been hurt so much more in your life to do something like that. And if you haven't been brought up with the skills or the tools to navigate that, if you've been brought up with a cane, well, all you know is a cane. And if you've been brought up by shouting at people, what you know is shouting at other people. So for me, it's more about education, awareness, understanding the humanity, the limitation, the double-sided reality of emotions. You can't take away hurt if you have joy. Like, those are two things of the same reality. So Yes, you want people to embrace that sense of joy, but at the same time, you cannot shy them away or you cannot shelter them from the hurt and from the pain because it will happen. And that's how you develop resiliency, the capacity to navigate through hardship of life. This is one thing that I wrote about transformation. Easy life is really easy, but there's no growth. The unfortunate reality of growth and learning is the hardship that comes with it. And whether you're talking philosophically or spiritually or even biologically, at the very foundation of cells or muscle cells, like how does a muscle cell will strengthen itself or get stronger? It destroys itself so they can rebuild itself. So that reality, you can't avoid it, but you can manage it and you can deal with it. And I think that one of the issues that we've had to deal with is we are still living with a narrative of the world that was too simplistic for that reality. We went from a society that was extremely primal, right? Where conflicts, it's all about resources, and it's nothing different than animals. Animals do it all the time. There's nothing different. And then slowly, gradually, you start to realize the complexity rises. And now you realize that it might be for my best interest to find that place of win-win because I have too much to lose in that war at all costs. But, conflict is built within nature. There's no species that doesn't do it. It's just that we don't look at it from a perspective of trying to compare us to the animals. But every single organism competes and takes over, whether it's a fungi, whether it's a plant. I mean, one of the things that I love, you've seen the BBC Green Planet, where they filmed the forest and these plants in time lapse. And we've always looked at forests and thinking, oh my God, this is so peaceful and perfect and in harmony. And then suffocating and just going at each other. So that is the primal.
It's for survival, right? It's not aggregation to elevate one's status.
The technology is a big part of it because it's a double-edged sword, but it's what's allowing us to rise above the primal, the pyramid of needs that we have. But ultimately, it's a lot to manage the complexity of need and how do you fulfill them in dealing with the pain and with the hurt and being valued. And at the same time, you don't want to give everything to everyone because they're not going to get anywhere either. So it's very complicated. Dr. Mark, what would be your 3 words of wisdom?
Patience, tolerance, and humility.
What would be the difference between patience and tolerance?
I think patience is just being able to let something take its course. Tolerance is it's almost in a sense of a resiliency, tolerating whatever comes in front of you, whatever you have to deal with, not running away from it. And then understanding that this too shall pass. Nothing ever, as you said, stays static. So there is a fine difference. And the tolerance in the side for humanity, tolerating those differences, understanding them, valuing them, appreciating it.
Are you optimistic about the future in space and this era we're entering?
I'm probably a little bit more optimistic about the future of space than I am about this planet right now. The reason why I say that is, we had such a hot winter, for example. This is not common to not have snow in Colorado, for example. What is to come is very concerning. And then certainly our wars and our fights and the hostilities that we encounter. And turning a blind eye, pandemics are always right around the corner. We're still not really out of this one. It's the chronic phase. We have a new version now that's come out. It's called the cicada species of SARS-CoV-2. And I think we are so divided that we're not utilizing what we have to combine, like we talked about early in our conversations, so that we can address whatever is in front of us. So I'm very concerned about our own planet here. And I'm optimistic about space. How's that for a way to look at future space?
You have to be optimistic for something and then a little bit more or less optimistic about the other.
Yeah, the yin-yang of it all, right?
Yeah, it is. It's like tension.
Yes.
You want to have a little bit of tension, but not no tension. enough so that
Didn't someone say that we need to explore space so we can continue our species after we destroy this planet? I kind of hope that's not the case, but it does continue the evolution of humanity.
the unfortunate reality of nature and evolution, every single organism will eat their environment to destruction, and then they're forced to go beyond the mountain, go beyond the river. Like if I put a fungi on this table, it will literally just consumes everything until it gets to the end, and then it has to figure out, what am I doing now? And that's, I think, for me, this is one of the successes of the human species, is every time that we've hit that boundary, we figure out a way to move forward. But is it different than anything in nature? No, this is actually the primal state of nature. And you look at Europe, what drove the immigration of Europe, or what drove every single immigration before? It was always resource driven. It was also conflict. It was also lack of opportunity. What makes you get into a ship and sail across the ocean and start again? It's not because you have everything. It's because you have nothing left. And the promise of something better is more attractive than what you have back home.
Well, so to put it in a positive spin, and this is sort of really taking it to the extreme, I've gotten into composting on the kitchen tabletop. So everything that is debris and trash, so to speak, going into this object. And then I'm waiting for it to become what we call, I guess, black gold. And then I can sprinkle it in my garden and grow vegetables and flowers. So in a sense, what is destruction can be the next essence of life. So that's a good way to see it.
There's always something better. It just depends how far back you step back. The path of an entrepreneur or business, you can look from really far away and then it's just this really nice line. But the closer you get, then the more jagged it is. And that's just perspective. But you don't want to have too much slack on that perspective, because otherwise you don't do anything. Right? You want to have enough so that you don't sweat the small stuff, but then you want enough worrying so that you can be involved, because otherwise you'll just be a couch potato and do nothing. So,
well, we are so fortunate in this world today that we can worry a little bit, but put it in a positive spin.
That's the thing. It's a place of fortunate, being grateful and fortunate to understand that we can actually ask these questions. We can think about it. That for me was one of humility in going on my expeditions, my wilderness expeditions, is because I was brought back to the essence of what it is to survive, right? You're out there and the only thing that you have that you need to be concerned is a roof over your head, eating, and not being eaten by the elements. So
That brings us back to our primal element of who we are as humans.
very primal. But Dr. Mark, so nice to have this conversation. This is, for me, this is what space is about. This is what life is about, is the human experience. And we can take it in so many different ways. And it will be very interesting as this podcast will be after Artemis is back. And this will be a big milestone for our society. So looking forward.
Looking forward to that as well. And we'll celebrate together.
Looking forward for our next time, Dr. Mark.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Be well.